Hello guys, today I'm looking at this Engineman 3D printed model kit of the WS-15 Turbofan engine. I was offered this recently. I asked you guys if you'd like to see it built. You said yes, so I accepted the offer and here is the kit. As you can see, this is fully working, it's motorized with more than 200 parts, although I suspect they may have counted the screws in these cases, and this is apparently 1:10 scale. It's certainly quite a big box, so let's have a look inside. Right away here we have got the central spindle, I think that is, for the engine, so that one needs to be kept safe. We've got a piece of paper with a couple of QR codes on it. All the instructions are electronic, and we've got the Engineman team with a little note there about various bits and pieces related to the kit. This is a 3D printed kit, and so it does note that you may have layer lines and support marks on some of the pieces. Before I go any further, let me just flick back to the Stirlingkit webpage to note a couple of things. Firstly, the price of the kit, $249, which is obviously quite expensive. I would say apart from the 1/32 scale Lancaster I built, more expensive than any other kit I've built on the channel before. Also note there the description says this is 1/20th scale, whereas the packaging said 1/10 scale. So we'll try to work out the true scale later on in the video. By the way, this WS-15 engine is apparently the same one which is used in the Chinese J-20 stealth fighter. Obviously I have no idea how accurate it is, but I didn't really make that link until I looked it up. Anyway, back to the product itself, and we certainly have some nice foam packaging here to keep it safe. Everything in its own sort of carved out section there. Oh, I thought that was metal, but feeling the weight of it, that is definitely not metal. Oh, it's 3D printed. I think, yeah, that's FDM printed. I can see the layer lines there on the fan blades. Okay, so that's one of the 3D printed parts there. What else have we got? This is also quite lightweight as well. It's metal coated or painted to look like metal, but it's very lightweight. It's not solid metal. I've got some other parts over here. It's not really clear what these are. Okay, we've got two bags here of bolts and nuts to go on the bolts. 100 in each there. What have we got here? Sort of a weird plastic piece. Oh, here's some metal pieces for sure. If I can get that out. Okay, we've got some bearings here. Okay, they are definitely metal. Quite a few bearings. Okay, interesting. I think the best thing for this is for us to take out all of the pieces and put them into some kind of tray. But before I do that, I just want to double check that they're all marked, and so I don't get pieces mixed up and things like that. Of course, what you didn't see there in the box were the instructions. That's because they're accessed via a QR code, which means you probably do need a phone really to open them up, at least the first time. When I accessed the QR code, it took me to a website which had the PDF on it, sort of interspersed with various Google ads, which was a bit annoying really. I simply downloaded the PDF to my Google Drive and opened it up on my computer. You can see that PDF here, so we've got the Engineman jet engine WS-15 with a sort of CAD style diagram of the engine. Then we've got two QR codes, so again you'd need to scan these with a phone. The YouTube one certainly takes us just to a sort of a regular YouTuber's YouTube channel where he's making the video. It's not Stirlingkit's channel as far as I can tell. We've got some instructions here, some safety instructions, some things are sharp. Pay attention to children who are injured. Yeah, children get in the way, they're very pesky things. Check the model integrity before starting the model. Yeah, it is motorized, so if something was not quite right, we could end up breaking some pieces. Assembly instructions. Direction of the inner arrow. Okay, so we've got the part numbers and the direction they should face on the inner ring there. That's quite handy. Fan blades have labels. The back is honeycomb. The new version has a triangle inside. Use the 6086Z bearings, which is the largest bearing. Okay. Oh, I think these are the instructions themselves. They're not. I thought these were warnings, but I think these are actually the instructions themselves, aren't they? Yeah, they are. These are the step-by-step instructions. All blue lettered parts are inside the white box during installation. Okay. Right, so these are the instructions. Not actually that long. Not too many pages. This gives me some faith that I could make this, he says now. Right, well I think with this on a laptop computer next to me, I think it's time to go to my desk and to start the build process. So the build starts with the low pressure compressor shaft, which basically means we take this yellowish resin piece here, we take the parts labelled A1 through to A5, stack them up in order with some bearings in the right places. Now it's not always easy to tell exactly what the orientation of these parts should be, so the best thing I find is to have the writing facing the same direction and to look for the orientation of the blades compared to the instructions. So that's how the stack should go, and then the resin piece goes through the middle, and you can see it's got that groove down the side there, which will line up with the grooves in the pieces, like so. You'll notice here, I mean this is a 3D printed kit, so the fan blades themselves there are not particularly smooth. They've got the remnants of what I'm assuming are supports from the 3D printing process on them. Anyway, they all go together like so. And that really is it for our step one. That is the low pressure compressor shaft. Step 2 sees us constructing the planet carrier. I suspect that might be a mistranslation. I'm putting these gears here onto the bottom of this piece. Now this is a good example of where the instructions are not very clear, because they show us attaching those gears with these pins, but it's really not clear which ones to use. The only reason that I worked out it was these is because there were 3 of them and there were 3 gears, and we don't use anything similar to these anywhere else in the instructions. We then screw that all together using one of the standard nuts and bolts that come with the kit. Step 3 sees us combining the parts we made in steps 1 and 2. So we have to get these gears lined up on the bottom so that the teeth are interlocking. And we have to make sure that the cutaway sections of those earlier parts are orientated correctly so that they line up with the cutaway section of the outside piece, the external piece. Now at this point I might be making this look quite easy, and in fact, to be honest, the construction itself is fairly straightforward. Most of my time on this kit was spent trying to understand the instructions. In particular, making sure I've got the right size bearings, because it tends to give you numbers in the instructions but there are no numbers on the bearings, so it will just say things like the second biggest or the smallest or things like that, and making sure the orientation of the pieces is all correct. A great example of that was here when I had to use these what I would call grub screws to go through these metal pieces and later on to grasp onto that main spindle. The instructions calls these Kimi screws. I'd never heard that name before, I don't know if it's a very common name, so I had to Google it to work out what it was talking about. At this point we put that central spindle into place, and we have to secure it with those grub screws before we put this big gold end plate on. It's not super clear in the instructions how far that should be exposed, but basically there plus the height of a bearing. This kit uses a lot of nuts and bolts to secure the parts together. In general the alignment's pretty good, but I did find it quite useful to put a couple in opposite sides just to make sure everything was nice and set before I did anything up too tightly. In step 5 we make the high pressure compressor shaft. This is very similar to the previous stages, alternating various pieces with bearings. Followed by the compressor casing. And again, as we add that casing, we make sure that the internal elements are rotated so that the cutaway section lines up with the cutaway section on the casing. These small plastic retaining pins are used through the outside of the case to make sure those pieces stay in position once they're there. You can start to see the engine building up now as we combine the parts from the previous steps. It is a bit repetitive, this process. You build up a section, then another section, join them together, repeat. But you can start to see it taking shape. This is the combustion chamber. Again, we have those sort of limiters there at the end of the cutaway section to make sure the internal section goes into the right spot. Lots more nuts and bolts. And a very similar process once again for the low pressure turbine shaft. Now I did run into a problem here. This silver coloured fixing ring needs to have two of those Kimi screws, those grub screws, in it to secure it to the optical shaft, the main shaft. But for some reason I've run out of Kimi screws. We get 3 of those rings in the kit, each one using 2 Kimi screws, but I only got 4 of the screws in my kit. I did write to the suppliers to tell them this, but also I thought actually missing those Kimi screws off is not such a problem. It simply means that these copper coloured blades won't turn with the rest of the engine, and to be honest they get covered up mostly by the next section anyway, so I'm not too bothered about that. But it is a bit annoying that some parts were missing. Now, none of the instructions for this kit are particularly clear, but I think that step 13 takes the proverbial biscuit. If you look at the instructions here for part 13, step 13, there's quite a lot missing compared to reality. So for example, the wires are not shown from this motor whatsoever, which really made it quite difficult to actually recognise it as a motor at first. And then that smooth cylindrical piece there that goes on the left hand side of the motor is this cylindrical piece with a groove in it and 2 sets of holes in it. So it doesn't really bear any relation to the drawing, other than it's a rough cylinder shape. So that was quite hard to understand. Equally, it doesn't mention tightening those small screws there, which you need to do to connect the motor to the shaft. Once the motor housing is screwed into place, we have to put this dome piece shape on the end. The text does sort of mention making the wire go through the tail nozzle pipe, but again the instructions don't show that, and it's a bit unclear. There are 2 parts here where we have to remove the supports from the manufacturing process. The instructions do make that clear that we must remove those. Finally, the outer casing goes into place and is done up with a lot of screws, and our engine is almost complete. Finally, we add a couple of AAA batteries and switch it on. Go. So guys, there we go. That was my build of the WS-15 Turbofan engine from Engineman. What did I think of the kit? Well, it was different from what I normally build. I'm not a huge engine enthusiast, but I thought I'd have a go at it. The build experience itself was okay. I finished the whole model in just under 3 hours. Most of that time was really spent trying to understand the instructions, particularly at the beginning. Once I got further into the instructions, I realised that basically every step is the same as the previous steps. You're just sort of slotting some sections onto a shaft or a central section, making sure they're facing the right way, and then screwing them to the previous section. So it was a little bit of a repetitive build process, but of course I guess that's what the inside of an engine is like, or certainly this engine is like. The instructions were by far the worst part of the kit. They're quite hard to understand, not particularly because the English is bad, although it is in places, but mainly just because it talks about pieces that don't have labels. So for example, the instructions will repeatedly say things like put the 634ZZ bearing into whatever position, and then it just says in brackets the second smallest bearing. Nowhere is it written 634ZZ. I don't know if that's a standard designation for bearings or not, but it's just not particularly helpful. I feel like everything else was in a bag, maybe they could have just labelled the bags. That was definitely the biggest issue with the instructions. As I say, it gets easier towards the end because you're used to it, and because your supply of parts is diminishing, and so you've got fewer to choose from when you're looking for the right one. Quality wise, well, the parts are all 3D printed and they do feel like it. They're very lightweight. There's definitely evidence of layer lines and remains of support structures on the parts. Cleanup wouldn't really be an option unless you're going to paint it, because of course as soon as you start sanding off those things, you're going to reveal the plastic underneath. You're going to remove the paint. But then again, perhaps a kit like this isn't really possible with the injection moulded plastic. I don't know. It's hard to say. Is the kit worth $249? I'd probably have to say no, I don't think it is. It's an interesting model, I guess, but for the 3 hours it took me to build it, that's quite a high hourly rate, isn't it? When you think about how much plastic kit you could buy for $249, or how many hours you can get out of a standard plastic kit, I know they're not necessarily workable, and this is motorized, but nevertheless I do think that price point is quite a bit too high, really. The actual fit of the kit itself wasn't bad. The parts went together nicely enough. There was nothing that was too tight and had to be sanded down. There was nothing that was too loose and almost came off or anything like that. But the parts do look just a little bit rough. And I think overall, just a little bit of the presentation is just a bit off as well. You know, the fact that the website says it's 1/20th scale, the box says 1/10 scale. For a premium kit, that just seems a bit unusual. Also, the claim of 200 parts, I mean, that really must include the nuts and bolts. And okay, maybe I suppose maybe you can include those because you have to put them on, but actual parts that you build together, there's nowhere near that many. As I say, I completed this in less than 3 hours. I guess it will look quite nice possibly on the model shelf, though to be honest, running out of space on my shelf, I'm not sure I'd keep it around for that long before perhaps confining it to a cupboard or giving it away to somebody who wanted it. I guess as an educational tool, this could be quite helpful for some people, perhaps if you're sort of teaching how turbofan engines work, or if you've got a particular interest in that field. Of course, being motorised is a big benefit, but I think you'd have to be quite into your engines to pay the price for this kit, particularly given how quickly you will finish the build. Stirlingkit do a number of engines on their website, as you can see here, all for fairly hefty price tags. Of course, it's up to you whether or not you would pay the price for those kits, each to their own. Personally, I wouldn't pay that much for this particular kit. So yeah, I'm not really sure what else to say. I don't want to set out to trash a product. I have had other products sent to me by other companies before which were just absolutely awful, and I completely declined to review them because they were so bad, or in fact dangerous in some cases. That's not the case for this, but at the same time I'm not going to give something a glowing review if I don't really think it's worth one. So I think this is definitely a case of you pay your money and you make your choice. I'm not sure what else to say really apart from that. I hope you enjoyed looking at this kit and seeing it built anyway. I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and I'd like to give special thanks to my YouTube supporters and Patreon members. Your support truly is appreciated, so thank you very much, guys. Thank you to everyone who watches, comments, shares, likes, etc, etc. I will have a regular model kit for my next video, and until then, have fun modelling.